The house had been in probate for 11 months when Nora Halstead finally got the keys. 11 months of certified letters she could barely afford to send, of phone calls to a courthouse in a county she had never visited, of a part-time paralegal named Dennis who answered her emails every 4 or 5 days and always began with just a quick update before explaining why nothing had moved. 11 months of paying rent on a studio apartment in Roanoke with a window that faced a parking deck, working double shifts of the hospital laundry 2 days a week and the front desk of a tire shop the other 3, putting aside what she could, which was never quite enough. 11 months of her half-brother Glenn telling her she was wasting her time and her money and her grief on a dead man's falling down property that nobody in their right mind would want. She got the keys on a Tuesday in March. She drove to Dunn County, West Virginia, in a car with a cracked windshield and 214,000 miles on it, with a sleeping bag in the trunk and a thermos of gas station coffee in the cup holder, and she turned off Route 9 onto a fire road that her phone's GPS did not recognize and had not recognized since she first tried to navigate it 6 months earlier. The house came into view through a gap in the trees, just after the road bent hard to the left. She had seen photographs. Dennis had sent them, taken by the county assessor's office sometime in the previous decade. A 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch, white paint that had gone gray, a tin roof the color of old iron. What the photographs had not communicated was how still the house was, how completely it had settled into the hillside around it, the way a stone settles into a stream bed over years until it seems less placed than grown. The porch listed slightly toward the left. One of the second-floor windows was boarded with plywood that had gone black with weather. The front yard, if you could call it that, was a tangle of broomsage and young locust trees that had come up through what might once have been a gravel drive. Nora sat in the car for a moment. She was 31 years old, and she had inherited a house from a father she had met exactly 4 times. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Her father's name was Raymond Halstead. He had left Nora's mother before Nora was born and had not been a presence in her life in any ordinary sense of the word. What he had been was occasional. A birthday card some years and not others. A phone call when she was 9 that her mother handed over with a careful expression and then stood nearby, trying not to listen. A meeting at a Shoney's in Beckley when Nora was 14, her mother waiting outside in the car, Raymond across the table in a flannel shirt looking at his coffee and asking her questions about school in the slightly formal way of a man who had not practiced this enough. Then a gap of 7 years. Then another call, this one to say he was sick, the kidney kind, and that he wanted her to know, which she had not known what to do with. She had written him letters after that. Not many. 3 or 4 over the following 5 years. Careful letters. The kind you write when you're not sure what register to use with someone who is both a stranger and not. He wrote back twice, both times on lined notebook paper, short, the handwriting of a man who did not write often. He said he was doing all right. He said the house was a good house, and he hoped she would see it someday. He said he was sorry for things he did not specify, and she had read those 2 words a number of times, sitting with them the way you sit with something that answers one question and opens several others. Raymond died in April of the previous year. He was 63. The kidney disease had moved slowly for a long time, and then quickly. His neighbor, a man named Calvin Prater who farmed the land on 2 sides of Raymond's property, had found him. Calvin had called the county. The county had called the number Raymond had listed as next of kin, which turned out to be a disconnected line belonging to Nora's mother's sister, who no longer lived at that number. And the whole thing had taken 3 weeks to reach Nora through a combination of Calvin Prater's persistence and the county's eventual decision to try the name Halstead in a broader search. She had not known what to feel. She still was not entirely sure. What she knew was that Raymond had left the house and its 11 acres to her, specifically and only to her, and was drawn up 6 years earlier by a lawyer in Elkins whose office Dennis the paralegal worked for. Glenn, who shared a different father and had never met Raymond, had called this unfair and then called it suspicious, and then, when Nora pointed out that Raymond had nothing to do with either of them and owed Glenn precisely nothing, had called it a liability she was foolish to accept. It's a condemned structure, Glenn had told her the last time they talked about it. In Dunn County, which doesn't have anything going for it. You'll spend $10,000 to find out it's worth $2,000. Glenn worked in commercial real estate in Richmond. He said condemn the way people say it when they want a word to do more work than it can technically support. The house had a notice from the county building office about deferred maintenance and an unrepaired roof section over the back addition. It was not condemned in any legal sense. But Glenn had a way of stating the shape of a thing so confidently that the details inside it blurred, and Nora had spent enough of her life in the blur of other people's certainties to recognize it now, even when it came from someone she loved. She got out of the car. The porch steps held. The front door key stuck initially and then turned, and the door opened with the particular resistance of frame that had shifted over winters without being used. The smell that came out was cold and layered, old plaster and wood, and the faint sweetness of a house that had been closed up for a long time. The front room was dim. Curtains still hung on the windows, a faded blue that the light came through more than the fabric blocked it. Nora stood in the doorway and looked. The furniture was still. There, an armchair, a side table with a lamp whose shade had gone yellow, a wood stove against the far wall with a stack of split wood beside it that Raymond had evidently set there at some point and never used. On the wall above the wood stove, a framed photograph she couldn't make out from the doorway. She moved through the room slowly. The kitchen had an old gas range and a farmhouse sink and a window above it that looked out toward the tree line on the back of the property. The water ran brown for 30 seconds and then ran clear, which meant the line was intact. The bathroom off the kitchen had a pedestal sink and a clawfoot tub, and a small window set high in the wall. Both upstairs bedrooms were small and plain. One had a bed frame with no mattress. The other held a wooden dresser and a chair, and, stacked in the corner, 2 cardboard boxes that Raymond had filled and apparently never decided what to do with. The back addition was where the roof problem was. Nora could see the water damage along the ceiling and the soft spot in the floor that she tested carefully with her boot before committing her weight to it. The damage was contained, though. One section of the roof, maybe 12 feet across, where flashing had failed and water had worked its way in over 2 or 3 winters. The rest of the structure was dry. She stood in the middle of the back addition and looked up at the damage and felt something she had not expected. Not despair. Something more like the particular calm that comes when a problem finally has a shape you can see clearly. Water damage, a roof repair. Those were things with solutions. You could look them up. You could call someone. You could, if you had to, learn to do them yourself. She spent the first night in the armchair in the front room with her sleeping bag around her shoulders and the wood stove going, which she had lit after an hour of coaxing with paper from one of the boxes upstairs and kindling split from a log she found on the porch. The fire caught and the room warmed slowly, and she sat in it and listened to the house settle around her. She began clearing the next morning. The 2 boxes from the upstairs bedroom first, which turned out to hold tax record from the 1990s and a collection of owner's manuals for appliances that no longer existed and 3 birthday cards Nora recognized the handwriting on before she opened them. Her own handwriting. The card she had sent. He had kept them in a box. She sat on the edge of the bare bed frame for a while after that. The wallpaper came to her attention on the 3rd day. She had been working through the back bedroom, the one with the dresser, pulling the furniture away from the walls to sweep behind it, when she moved the dresser and found a section of wall where the wallpaper had bubbled and peeled along the baseboard. Old wallpaper, a faded print of small blue flowers on a cream ground, the kind that went up in farmhouses across the region in the 1940s and 1950s and stayed up because nobody got around to taking it down. The peel had spread from a corner of the baseboard up about 1.5 feet, and where the paper had separated from the plaster, something was visible beneath it. Not plaster. Paper. Writing. Nora crouched down. The paper underneath the wallpaper was older than the wallpaper itself. She could see the edge of it where the blue flower pattern had separated, a heavier stock, yellowed, with ink that had faded to a brownish gray. She could make out letters, but not words at the angle she was crouching. She went to the kitchen and came back with a butter knife and a glass of water. She worked the seam of the peeled section back slowly, dampening the edge with her fingers, using the butter knife to ease the wallpaper free without tearing what was beneath. It came in a wide strip, the paste having dried to something brittle over decades. And as it came away, it revealed more of the older paper beneath. Not just a fragment, a full sheet, and then the edge of another sheet beside it, and the faint outline of a third beyond that. The handwriting on the first sheet was large and deliberate. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone writing something they want to be read clearly. She read the first 2 lines twice before she understood what she was looking at. T.O. whom it may find, the first line read, I am setting this down behind the wall of the room that belonged to my daughter Margaret, because she was the one who deserved to know the truth and was not told it while she had the chance to use it. Nora sat back on her heels. She looked at the wall. She looked at the strip of blue flower wallpaper in her hand. She set it down on the floor. She worked for the next 4 hours. She dampened and peeled and set aside, working across the wall in sections, her back protesting after the first hour, her knees on the bare floor, the butter knife moving in slow, careful strokes. The paste held in some sections and let go in others. Twice she pulled too quickly and the outer wallpaper tore, and she had to slow down again, reminding herself that whatever was under there had waited this long and could wait a little longer. By early afternoon, she had cleared 8 feet of wall. 3 sheets of older paper were fully revealed, plus most of a fourth. The handwriting ran across all of them, the same deliberate hand, with careful margins and paragraph breaks. The way a person writes when they understand that what they are writing needs to survive time and the attention of a stranger. Nora spread her sleeping bag on the floor, sat on it cross-legged, and read. The name at the bottom of the last page was Ervin Dale Marsh. The date beside it was September 14th, 1961. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Ervin Dale Marsh had been Raymond's maternal grandfather. Nora knew this much from a single conversation she'd had with Calvin Prater, Raymond's neighbor, the week she received the keys. Calvin had mentioned it in passing. The way people mention things they assume you already know, Ervin built the original part of the house, the section without the addition, back before the war. She had filed it away without knowing what she would need it for. Ervin Dale Marsh had owned, in 1961, 47 acres of land in Dunn County. Not 11, 47. The original 11, the ones Raymond had held until his death, plus 36 additional acres along the creek drainage on the property's eastern and southern sides. 36 acres of bottomland, Ervin wrote, that had been in his family since his grandfather Clement Marsh had bought them from the county land office in 1887 for $11.60. The 36 acres had been taken from him. Not sold, not transferred willingly. Taken. Ervin wrote it plainly, the way a man writes when he has nothing left to lose by plainness. In 1958, a mining interest operating under the name of Collier Creek Extraction Company had approached him about purchasing the mineral rights beneath the 36 acres. He had refused. He wrote the number of times he had refused, for separate approaches over 18 months, each one with a higher offer and a more insistent representative. The final representative had been a lawyer from Charleston whose name Ervin recorded as T.W. Dunning, and Dunning had arrived at the house not to make an offer, but to deliver a document. The document claimed that Ervin owed a debt of $1,940 to a company called Dunn Valley Fencing Supply. Ervin wrote that he had never done business with Dunn Valley Fencing Supply and did not know of its existence. Dunning had explained that the debt had been purchased by a holding company and that if Ervin did not settle within 60 days, the holding company would file to attach the eastern and southern parcels as partial satisfaction. Ervin had gone to a lawyer in Elkins. The Elkins lawyer had told him the filing was legitimate on its face and that contesting it would take money Ervin did not have in time the 60-day window did not allow. The attachment had proceeded. The 36 acres had been conveyed by court order to the holding company in November of 1958. The holding company had sold the mineral rights to Collier Creek Extraction within 3 months. What Ervin had done after the conveyance was the part he wanted someone to find. He had not accepted the debt. He had not accepted that he owed Dunn Valley Fencing Supply $1, let alone $1,940. And so he had spent the 3 years between 1958 and 1961 tracing the paper. He had written to the county recorder's office. He had written to the Secretary of State's office in Charleston regarding the incorporation of Dunn Valley Fencing Supply and the holding company that had purchased the debt. He had written to the county clerk in 2 adjacent counties. He had, in the summer of 1961, received a response from a clerk in the Secretary of State's office that contained, whether the clerk understood its significance or not, a piece of information that changed the shape of everything. Dunn Valley Fencing Supply had been incorporated in 1956. Its sole registered officer of record was a man named Thomas William Dunning, T.W. Dunning, the same man who had arrived at Ervin's door to deliver the debt notice. The lawyer who had represented the mining interests that wanted Ervin's land had also owned the company that generated the debt that was used to take it. Ervin had written this down, underlined it, and then written, "I do not know if a court would still hear this. I am 64 years old, and I have not the means or the health to carry it myself. But I want my daughter Margaret to have this in full, and I want whoever comes after her to understand what was done to this family and what proof exists of it, because proof of wrongdoing does not spoil like corn, and the record of what T.W. Dunning did is still sitting in the courthouse in Dunn County waiting for someone with the patience to pull it. The record of the incorporation is at the Secretary of State's office in Charleston. The original debt notice is in the possession of the Elkins attorney whose name was Herbert Cobb, now likely retired or dead, but whose files may still exist. The deed conveying my family's land under court order is recorded at the Dunn County Courthouse. The mineral lease between the holding company and Collier Creek Extraction is also recorded there. All of it is in the public record. I hid this letter because I did not trust the mailbox or the people who opened it, and I trusted the wall more. Margaret, if you find this, the land along the creek was ours. All of it. What they took crooked. Nora sat on the sleeping bag in the dimming afternoon light with 8 feet of plaster wall in front of her and Ervin Marsh's words across it, and she was very still for a long time. She did not call Glenn. She thought about calling Glenn and did not. She called a woman named Patty Ferris instead. Patty was a paralegal at a different firm from Dennis, a firm in Morgantown that Nora had found 6 months earlier when she was trying to understand the probate process and had spent 2 hours reading reviews on a legal aid website. Patty had answered her initial email inside an hour and had given her 3 pieces of accurate information that Dennis had never mentioned. Nora had kept her number. She read Patty the letter over the phone. All of it, from to whom it may find to the last line about trusting the wall. There was a long pause on Patty's end when she finished. "What year did you say the debt notice was filed?" Patty asked. 58. The conveyance went through in November of 58. And the incorporation records he's describing, those would be at the Secretary of State's office. He says they would be. He wrote to them in 61 and got a response. I don't know if the response is still findable, but the original incorporation filing will be public record. Patty was quiet again. Nora could hear her typing. "I need to connect you with someone," she said finally. "Her name is Vera Okonkwo. She's an attorney in Charleston who does property rights work, specifically the kind that involves historical land transfers in extractive industry counties. This is her area. Is it expensive?" There was a pause that Nora understood to mean yes. Then Patty said, "She also does contingency arrangements if the claim has merit. Let me call her first." Vera Okonkwo called the following morning at 7:30. She had already spoken to Patty and had already pulled the Dunn County property records for the Marsh parcels online before she dialed. She was direct in the way of someone who has managed a lot of other people's crises and learned that warmth and efficiency are not opposites. The conveyance is in the public record exactly where Ervin said it would be, she told Nora. So is the mineral lease. I can also access the Secretary of State's incorporation records for that period. That's a 2-day process. What I can't access remotely is anything in the estate files of the attorney he mentions, Herbert Cobb, but I have a contact in Elkins who can look into whether those files were archived anywhere. What does it mean if the incorporation records show what Ervin says they show? Vera paused carefully. It means that the debt used to force the conveyance was generated by an agent of the mining interest. That's constructive fraud at minimum, potentially extortion, and the conveyance resulting from it would be legally voidable under West Virginia property law. The question is whether the statute of limitations has run and whether the current ownership of that land can be traced clearly enough to make a claim actionable. Can it be? That depends on what the full chain of title looks like. Collier Creek Extraction was a company, and companies sell assets. That land may have changed hands several times since 1958. Each transfer complicates the claim. She paused again, but it does not necessarily end it. Not if the original fraud can be documented. Nora looked at the wall. Ervin Marsh had been right. The record did not spoil like corn. It had been sitting in the courthouse in Dunn County for 63 years. She photographed everything. She spent 2 hours on her hands and knees with her phone, photographing each sheet of paper in sections, overlapping the frames so that no word was cut off between shots. She photographed the wall itself, the full 8 feet, to show the context of where the sheets had been pasted. She photographed the layer of blue flower wallpaper she had peeled back, stacked beside the baseboard like shed skin. She sent all of it to Vera Okonkwo in a compressed folder before she went to sleep that night. Vera called back in 2 days. She had the Secretary of State's records. T.W. Dunning had incorporated Dunn Valley Fencing Supply on March 8, 1956. His name was the only name on the incorporation filing. The company had never filed an annual report after 1959, which under West Virginia corporate law meant it had been administratively dissolved, but the founding documents remained in the archive. There was no record of Dunn Valley Fencing Supply having done business with anyone named Ervin Marsh or otherwise in Dunn County. The debt had been manufactured. The land had changed hands twice since Collier Creek Extraction had held it. Collier Creek had been acquired by a larger mining company in 1971, which had been acquired in turn by a regional energy holding company in 1994. That holding company still owned the surface rights on 31 of the original 36 acres. The other 5 acres had been sold to a private buyer in 2003 and were part of an adjacent farm. It is a traceable chain, Vera said. That makes it workable. The more significant problem is that the mineral rights were severed from the surface rights in 1959. The surface rights we can potentially make a claim on based on the fraudulent originating conveyance. The mineral rights, which were what Collier Creek actually wanted, are a more complex matter because they've changed hands multiple times and each transfer was made in good faith by a party who had no knowledge of the original fraud. What does that mean practically? It means the surface rights claim is stronger than the mineral rights claim. The surface land is 31 acres. I want to be straightforward with you about what that land is worth. It's creek bottom pasture and second growth timber in Dunn County. It's not oil field acreage. Current market value, I'd estimate between $40,000 and $70,000 for the 31 acres, depending on the timber assessment. Nora absorbed that. It was not a number that changed a life overnight. It was a number that mattered. But here's the other thing, Vera said. Her voice shifted slightly, the way voices shift when a person is moving from careful to significant. I looked at the surface rights more carefully this morning. The creek bottom section of those 31 acres sits on the drainage that feeds into the Carlo watershed. There have been conservation easement purchases in this county over the past 8 years through a state land trust program that targets exactly that kind of riparian buffer land. 3 adjacent parcels have sold into that program at prices between $3,000 and $4,500 per acre. Nora did the math slowly. If the claim is established and the 31 acres are recoverable, she said, and if the land trust program applies, it would need to be assessed, and the claim would need to clear first. But yes, if both things hold, you would be looking at a materially different number than $40,000 to $70,000. Glenn called that evening. Nora had not called him, but word had apparently reached him through a channel she couldn't trace, which in retrospect she attributed to Patty Ferris having mentioned something to someone at the Morgantown firm that had gotten back to someone Glenn knew in commercial real estate in Richmond. Glenn said he'd heard she'd found something in the house and asked what it was. She told him the outline, the letter, the wall, the corporate fraud, Vera Okonkwo in the chain of title. Glenn was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of moving parts, he said. You have a lawyer involved? I do. Good. Make sure she's credible. These rural property claims can go nowhere fast if the attorney doesn't know the right clerks. The right clerks were Vera's entire professional network. But Nora did not say this. "I just wanted to go in clear-eyed," Glenn said. "If this pans out, great. If it doesn't, you don't want to have spent the money chasing it." "I know," Nora said. She had not told him about the land trust numbers. The Dunn County Courthouse records took 3 weeks to fully compile. Vera worked with a title researcher named Stan Buckley who had been tracing property claims in the region for 22 years and who, according to Vera, knew the Dunn County deed books the way other people knew their own neighborhood. Stan pulled the original 1958 conveyance, the mineral lease, the subsequent acquisition documents, and a surveyor's plat from 1949 that showed the original Marsh property boundaries before the loss. He also found something Vera had not anticipated. The 1949 plat had been filed by Ervin Marsh in connection with a boundary agreement with a neighboring landowner. It was a routine filing, the kind that happened hundreds of times a year across the county in that period. But attached to the plat was a notation, in the county surveyor's hand, that described the eastern creek drainage as containing a year-round spring with a measured output of approximately 3 gallons per minute, and noting that the spring had been the source of the Marsh family's domestic water supply since prior to the first deed on record. The notation was not a legal instrument, but it was a piece of the county's own official record describing a water source on the Marsh property that predated the fraudulent conveyance. The Land Trust Assessment Team, when Vera contacted them, was interested before they had finished reading the summary. They came out to the property in early May, 3 people in a state agency truck with clipboards and waders and a handheld water flow meter. They walked the creek drainage for half a day while Nora made coffee in Raymond's kitchen and waited. The lead assessor, a woman named Blythe Garrison who had been with the Land Trust program for 11 years, came back to the house at noon with mud on her boots and sat at the kitchen table and said that the riparian corridor was in better condition than she had expected given the decades of industrial holding. She also said the spring was producing at 4.1 gallons per minute, which was above the threshold that triggered the Enhanced Protection designation under the program's criteria. The claim filed in Dunn County Circuit Court by Vera Okonkwo on Nora's behalf in June was 27 pages long, with 63 exhibits. It named the Regional Energy Holding Company as the defendant and sought title recovery of the 31 acres based on the fraudulent originating conveyance of 1958, documented by the Secretary of State in corporation records, the absence of any legitimate business history for Dunn Valley Fencing Supply, and the sworn written account of Ervin Dale Marsh, dated September 14, 1961, which had been preserved in situ behind the wallpaper of a farmhouse bedroom in Dunn County, West Virginia, for 63 years. The holding company's legal team filed a response in August and requested mediation rather than trial, which Vera said was the response of a party that had looked at the evidence and made a calculation. Mediation took place in October in Charleston. Nora drove down the night before and stayed in a motel on the south side of the city. She slept badly. She had driven 6 hours and spent the equivalent of 4 months of saved-up laundry shift money on legal fees, and she was 31 years old and had not told anyone except Vera and Patty and Calvin Prater, and eventually Glenn, what she had found behind the wallpaper of a dead man's farmhouse. Calvin Prater had said, when she called him to explain what was happening, that Raymond had always thought there was something off about how Ervin lost that bottom land. Said it more than once over the years. Never could prove it. Always figured whatever proof there was had been lost in the fire. What fire? Nora had asked. Calvin had paused. Ervin's house burned down in 1962, the year after he would have put that letter in the wall. The family lost everything in it. Moved into what's now Raymond's place, the smaller house on the upper 11 acres. Whatever Ervin had kept indoors, any letters he'd received, any files, any copies, all of it went in the fire. Nora had sat with that for a long time. A man who knew the documentation was at risk had put a copy behind a wall the year before the fire took everything else. He had trusted a wall more than a mailbox and more than a filing cabinet, and he had been right too. The mediation settlement was reached on the second day. The holding company agreed to convey the 31 surface acres to Nora Halstead as the successor heir of Ervin Dale Marsh, in exchange for a release of any mineral rights claims. Vera had advised Nora before the session that the mineral rights claim was the weaker half of the filing and that a full recovery of the surface land, without litigation, was the better outcome. Nora had agreed. She signed the agreement on a Wednesday afternoon in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Charleston, and then took the elevator down to the street and stood on the sidewalk in the October air. 31 acres of creek bottom land in Dunn County, West Virginia. She called Vera from the sidewalk. Vera said, in a measured voice she had used throughout, that she was pleased with the outcome and that the next step was the formal title transfer, which would take 6 to 8 weeks. Then she said, because Vera was someone who said the full thing when the full thing needed saying, that Nora should understand what she had done. The documentation Ervin Marsh left had been specific enough and preserved well enough that it had survived 63 years and a courthouse fire and 4 decades of obscurity and established a claim that most attorneys would have called unworkable on its face. He was a careful man, Nora said. He was, Vera agreed. And you were patient. That combination covers a lot of ground. The land trust agreement was finalized in January. The 31 acres had been assessed by that point, the spring documented, the riparian corridor mapped. The program offered Nora a conservation easement purchase at $3,900 per acre for the creek drainage portion, which was 22 of the 31 acres. The remaining 9 acres, the upland timber section, she retained outright, which Vera had advised and which Nora had decided on her own before Vera mentioned it. The easement payment came to $85,800. She cleared the laundry job first, then the tire shop front desk, though she gave a month's notice because the woman who owned the shop had given her the extra shifts during the worst of the probate months without being asked. She paid the cracked windshield. She paid the 6 months of legal fees she still owed Vera above the contingency arrangement. She paid the roof repair on the back addition of Raymond's house, which took 11 days and cost $4,300 and left the structure dry for the first time in 3 winters. She moved in on a Saturday in February. Calvin Prater came by that evening with a casserole dish wrapped in foil and set on the kitchen counter without much ceremony. He was 72, thin, with the deliberate movements of a man who had learned not to rush anything physical after a back surgery 5 years earlier. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the repaired ceiling in the back addition and nodded once. Raymond would have liked that you fixed it, he said. He always meant to get to it. Nora poured 2 glasses of water from the kitchen tap, the tap that ran clear now without any weight, and set one in front of Calvin. She told him about the mediation, about the easement, about the 9 acres of timberland she was keeping. Calvin was quiet for a moment after she finished. He looked out the kitchen window at the dark tree line. Ervin used to talk about that bottomland, he said. Not often. The way people talk about something that sits wrong, that they can't quite leave alone. He said his grandfather had worked that ground for 30 years before Ervin ever put a fence on it. Said it was the best soil in the county because it flooded just enough in spring to stay rich and just not enough to be worthless. Is that true? Nora asked. Calvin looked at her. It's creek bottom in Dunn County. It's about as close to true as anything gets around here. Glenn called the week after she moved in. He had seen the public record of the title transfer, which was how Glenn had found out about most of it, and he said he owed her an apology, which he offered in the careful way of a man who is not entirely sure of the currency he is dealing in. She accepted it without making anything more of it, which she found was the approach that cost her the least and gave him the most room to do better. She walked the 31 acres for the first time in early March, the day the easement transfer finalized. She went alone, early, in rubber boots and a heavy coat, the morning coming gray and cold over the ridge. The creek was running full from the snowmelt. The spring, when she found it, was exactly where Blythe Garrison's team had mapped it, in a sheltered bend of the hillside where a granite ledge caught the drainage from above and channeled it into a steady outflow that ran into the creek 10 feet below. It was not dramatic. It was a seam in a hillside with cold water moving out of it, the way water moves from places it has been gathering itself for a long time. She stood there for a while, long enough that her feet went cold and the light came up over the ridge and the bare trees threw long shadows across the snow. Ervin Marsh had written his letter in 1961, behind a wall in a room that belonged to his daughter. He had watched his land taken by a man who made up a debt and used a lawyer to deliver it. And he had not been able to stop it, and he had not been able to prove it in time, and the house that held his copies had burned the year after he hid them. He had trusted a wall, and the wall had held. Raymond had grown up in the smaller house on the upper acres and had known, Calvin said, that something had gone wrong with the bottomland, and had never had the proof to say what. He had left the farmhouse to Nora in a drawn up 6 years before he died, to a daughter he had met 4 times and written to rarely, and kept birthday cards from in a box. She did not know if he had known what was in the wall. She thought probably not. She thought he had left her the house because it was the thing he had to leave, and because she was the one he had written to, and because people sometimes do the right thing without being able to explain exactly why. She walked back up the hillside and across the creek bottom and through the tree line to the house. The wood stove was cold and she got it going again, and she stood at the kitchen window while the room warmed and looked out toward where the spring was, which she could not see from the house but knew was there. She would do something with the 9 upland acres eventually. She had not decided what. There was no rush. The ground would wait. There was a name on a wall in a back bedroom, and a record in a courthouse, and a spring running out of a hillside in Dunn County. And all of it had been there the whole time, patient as groundwater, waiting for someone to come looking and have the sense to read what they found. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.